Great to see everybody. I just thank you so much for having me, Paula, and I am excited to speak at a meetup in a city I have never visited. So one day I'll get to Seattle, but it's really great to be able to connect with everyone here. So just a little bit about me and my background. I started off in publishing, in book publishing and magazine publishing. Went to a company where I was creating all of their content. This is in 2011, creating their print magazine, doing all their web content, doing email, figuring out and experimenting with social media and with my boundless energy. And then realized I was making all this stuff and didn't know how to measure it. Had no idea what was working, what wasn't working, and the company wasn't really actually all that interested in that. So I went agency side and learned SEO and worked at a couple agencies before going out on my own a couple of years ago. And so that's where we are today. I've had a pretty deep experience in SEO since 2013 is really when I started. So we're going to go through a lot of the changes that I've seen in the past few years and in changes that we're kind of anticipating coming up with some of the changes or some of the new technologies that Google's announced and just what I'm seeing working with clients right now. And yeah, as I go on, if you are interested, I send a weekly newsletter. Next week I will be sending, I've been on break for a few weeks, but next week I'll start up again with our second anniversary issue. Let's get started. All right. So, this is a kind of high level overview of these big changes that are really affecting SEO and how to think about SEO too as we see the more natural language processing, just things changing. Search has been around for 20 years. We all generally know how to use it now. And so every search is adapting as we are adapting to search as well. So I'll go through, my introduction is actually just a lot of SEO history and then go through some, these 5 core concepts that are shaping SEO. And then we can have some discussions or have some questions afterwards. So in general, 15 years of SEO in like 3 minutes. SEO until about 2015 or so was really very formulaic. You're really looking at a certain number of words, pages. You're looking at exact phrases throughout a web page, throughout a website, and creating one page for each key phrase that you want. If you have been working in the industry for a while, you may recognize this graphic, that the perfectly optimized page about chocolate donuts. I am glad no one uses this anymore. It is not, if you did this today, it would not necessarily be the most perfectly optimized page in the world. There would probably be a few too many keywords on it. Until about, and this is kind of still happening, but really the HubSpot model took off in the early 2010s, where HubSpot became very well known because they built this blog that addressed a lot of long tail topics, and HubSpot capitalized on that. And people kept seeing HubSpot, and then they converted them to users and taught them their blogging strategy. So it really, in the HubSpot model, the information architecture isn't as important as having a giant pile full of blog topics that match individual search queries. Rank tracking, definitely very important for a while, and still some people still do a lot of rank tracking, but that was really the major way that people track progress in SEO. Until 2015 or so, Google wasn't even thinking about they were thinking about the mobile experience, but mobile SEO updates didn't, mobile get-in was, I think, in 2015. So mobile SEO was pretty much non-existent. There wasn't anything, like near me features. And Google was just focusing on one algorithm and one device experience versus multiple. And then in 2013, the Hummingbird update, and Google turned on or made most keyword data not visible in Google Analytics, which changed the way a lot of SEOs did things. This is about when I came into the industry, which is when not-provided was happening. And basically, we used to have a lot more exact information about what keywords led people to directly convert than we do now. Now you get very little of that information. You can get a little bit from Search Console, but once people actually get to your website, you don't really know what keywords they've converted on. That's what not provided data is, and it's something like 97% of keyword data is not provided. And all of these things meant that Google has always said, focus on content first, focus, like the SEO, black hat SEO tactics, keyword stuffing, put that aside in favor of making better content, because we're going to be trying to make algorithms that process your content better. So in the past 5 years or so, mobile SEO experience became Google's priority. The mobile SERP has changed immensely, even in the past 5 years. There's all these nice, the sliders that say things to do, lots of subheadings, lots of different modules. Definitely a big priority for search engines was that mobile experience and getting mobile right. Natural language processing techniques are quietly becoming more advanced in the past 5 years. Google wasn't really talking about them until about I think it was 2019 was when BERT, which is one of its one of the natural language processing models, came out, but these were kind of quietly getting more advanced, and natural language processing within the Google search engine and within your queries was absolutely getting better throughout the 2010s. Things that became more important in, especially after 2017 or so, the expertise, authority, trust, EAT, as many say, and which is just your authority and how you build authority within a search engine. Also what's called YMYL pages, which stands for your money or your life. Pages that are directly related to commerce as well as health. Anything related to your money or your life became the standards for those pages for trust and for facts was higher than other types of pages, more general pages. But in the late 2010s, certain tactics started getting phased out. Doorway pages, which is where you have one page for every single iteration of a synonym of a keyword with very thin content or very little variation on each page. Those are phased out. Keyword stuffing was really phased out by the end of the 2010s. It's really not a good idea to have one keyword, an unnatural number of times on each page. But meanwhile, components. And also in the late 2010s, we started talking about intent a lot, where Google is trying to figure out what a search, or what Google SEOs, people are trying to figure out what a specific search term means, rather than just using, and what people mean by the search term when it's not evident. So this is my favorite example of intent. If you search for the word Prince in Minnesota, because of your location and just general knowledge of Prince in America, I think in general, Prince the musician comes up. If you search for Prince in another country, like in England, you may get another, you may get Prince William or something about monarchy. So intent based on location, based on just what people click on after they search for a specific term, understanding the mindset of the customer who's searching became way more important for optimization than just the query itself. All right. Question answer optimization. People also ask has been a big thing for a few years. The people also ask widget, which surfaces relevant queries that Google thinks are similar to the main query. This is when I was Googling Brad Pitt this week, and here is some people also ask questions about Brad Pitt. The question answer optimization model people have been talking about because of people also ask. It's a model of optimization where content strategists and folks will just kind of look at what autocomplete says or look at what the people also ask questions are, and then write an SEO page like that includes all those questions as an FAQ. It's never been my favorite method of optimization, mostly because the data of like how many people actually search for these questions is pretty low when you look at comparative search volumes to other types of questions. And also because these questions are generated, the people also ask in Google autocomplete questions are generated from a different algorithm than the natural language processing algorithms that are indexing search results. So basically the question answer data is kind of an interim into getting into higher quality content. But if you're just answering questions that are appearing on the search page for a relevant query just because they're appearing on the search page and not because they're relevant. Because if I'm searching for Brad Pitt and I'm optimizing for what is the #1 best movie of all time, those are kind of two different topics. So the question answer optimization thing became really popular, but I hope that we kind of move away from it as far as SEO goes. And then the other thing is, I just forgot to change the heading up in the corner. This is happening now, but digital activity just in general, and especially with the rise of TikTok, which is a social network that is not on the web at all. Digital activity is diversifying to non-indexed social networks. Obviously, most Facebook isn't indexed and never really has been, but our activity is definitely diversifying. And as Seattle, y'all are in Amazon town. People are spending more time on individual platforms than necessarily going to Google as their first stop for absolutely everything. Now, people still use Google a tremendous amount each day, but there's different uses for different types of digital media. So that's something that's been happening in the past couple of years. So are there any questions? I saw a couple chats pop up, but this is kind of a good place to break about if there's any questions. I know I just kind of ran through that.
I'll jump in. Larry's having some internet issues, but Joel had a good question in the chat about how targeted search, or how does targeted search enforce the idea of filter bubbles, and is there a way out? Joel, if you want to say anything more about that, I can unmute you, or if Deborah, if you want.
So one of the things that I've often been concerned about with using search engines like Google is that I can put in a search term and get one response, and somebody else with a different political or religious or ethnic background will get a different response, and it just kind of enforces everything we've been searching for over time. And so my question is, how do we keep out of those little bubbles and really become more of a larger community?
Yeah, so with filter bubbles and Google organic search, it is not quite as personalized as some people believe. If you do visit one site over another, like if you go to Fox News over and over and over again, Google is going to see that if you're logged into Chrome, you might see Fox News results more often than another news source. However, if for a lot of political topics and just kind of more like controversial or newsy information in general, it's not really as personalized as the perception. as it is as other social networks are. Like the way that Twitter and Facebook optimize is for engagement, whereas Google optimizes for quality. And they want you to be able to go and find a website that is relevant. Where you do see the most personalization is in location, and in location data. And also, again, if you have visited a certain website, not necessarily a political view, but a website itself, and Google knows that you like that website and you're signed in, you'll see that a little bit more often. But as far as the information that surfaces in Google, there's not as much personalization going on, just because the scale of machine learning that would be required to even make some of those assumptions that's so huge with the number of search queries that Google is processing. So there's a lot less filter bubbling within natural search, I would say. And I'm also saying Google, because Google has 93% of all organic search share. So this is very different from how social networks kind of process and understand algorithmic information. Does that help?
Yes, thank you very much.
Cool.
I'm gonna skip ahead. There's another good question I really want to get to, which is cool. John's. But because you were talking about social media platforms, Suzanne asked about whether social media platforms are indexed besides Pinterest.
No, not really. Public Facebook pages are indexed. So if you're a small business that only has a Facebook page, that is sometimes indexed, but it's a huge percentage of what's on Facebook is not indexed. Instagram's not indexed. TikTok's not indexed. Twitter is shows up in profile, but it's rarely Twitter content is rarely indexed for non-branded terms. So yeah, most social networks are not indexed in Google. Which is its own thing. The way that people search for information on TikTok and Instagram with hashtags is there's a lot of misinformation around there. I don't think that those are the best places to search for information, but people use the tools they're comfortable with. So I say Google, and I'm really talking very specifically about natural search engines. Bing also, obviously, and some of in other countries, larger indexes, but mostly websites, because the thing with, a lot of platforms is they don't want Google to crawl it because it's their own content.
Right. John, I am definitely going to get to your question, because I actually have a similar, because I'm interested in that as well. But there's another question that's a little bit related to the previous, which has to do with the question about filter bubbles and so on. So Anu, and please, I hope I'm not pronouncing your name incorrectly, asks, what is the effect on SEO effectiveness when people, me for instance, that's Anu saying that, turn off all history tracking, etc.? How would Google handle it, for instance?
It's going to process the query like it has always processed queries, where it's going to show the most relevant, depending on your query, it's going to show the most relevant search results. Based on the number of people who are linking to a specific site, based on how that specific site has performed for that search result before, as well as, how relevant the language is on the page. And we're going to be talking a lot about knowledge graphs and topic relevance. And also it has to do with, authority, how much authority your website has built up. There's a lot of different types of factors that really go into the search results. But if you're not logged in, you're still going to see very relevant search results. And they're location aside, which location does still come into play with some with some incognito browsers. Location aside, Google, like I said, it doesn't really personalize the results all that much. So you'll see, unless there's a location specific, like if you're searching for pizza near me in a single place, you're clearly going to get pizza in your direct location. Versus a general broad query about, just about pretty much anything else that's not related to a store near you. You'll get similar information depending where you are in the country and in your language. So I hope that helps.
Great. I'm going to ask one more here, and then because I know Deborah's got more presentation to go, and in fact, feel free to say, I'll get to that, in your slides if you will. But John asks, how should a government entity, which isn't buying digital advertising, optimize their web pages so their content ranks higher in search engines? As someone who also works on a government website, I'm curious about this as well.
So we'll talk actually a lot about this, but I will say that you don't have to do as much by being a .gov, you get some special privileges by being official, and you don't have to do as much of the tweaking of optimization. But we're going to talk a lot about topic-based information architectures and structured content, and all of that is super relevant to government. That said, I don't actually work with very many government clients, and there may be some other government-specific like SEO best practices that I am not as aware of, but a lot of the structured data and topic optimization absolutely applies to you.
Great. All right. Well, let's let you get on to more of your presentation here then. Cool. Thanks everyone for your good questions.
Yeah,
just a reminder. Yeah, drop your questions in the chat. We'll get to them as many as we can. So take it away, Deborah.
Absolutely. So we talked a little bit about natural language processing. Google wants to understand, what you mean by typing in a specific query. It announced in April, I believe, it's MUM technology, which is basically Google is trying to understand across languages what your query means and what results might be populated, not just in your own location, but with other locations that might also have relevant results. This is, we can talk all day about whether this is the right thing to do or not, but this is kind of what's happening is they're really trying to broaden and make this like the global search index, it seems like. Core Web Vitals, if you work in any website that has, if you work with SEO at all, you have probably heard Core Web Vitals come up. I'll talk about that a little bit. One of the big changes that has happened really recently, number 3, is that Google is working more with news sites and to help them optimize for search more. And also, I think it's 2018 was when Google said it would index content that is behind a paywall, news content that's behind a paywall, which has been huge. I mean, that's why we have, the entire paid subscription, paid newsletter boom, all of that. That is a direct result of Google's change in policy because it used to non-index that content. One of the other things that happened is last year, COVID-related searches, you may have noticed, even now with COVID-related searches, different things show up on the search results page that you may have never seen in Google before. What happens is that Google knew that there was a lot of misinformation. And I mean, remember early days in the pandemic, no one knew what was going on. And so it was very clear that those results, those up to the minute search results were they're more editorially selected and rather than Google's index, which is rather than algorithmically selected. So Google, they're kind of like, oh, we let the computer do it. It's kind of showing our hand a little bit. It's like, oh yeah, but when you want to, you can control those search results. And as I just talked about with social networks, search isn't the only place that people go to find information anymore. It is where they go to confirm and understand information more in depth. And I think that thinking about that as the role of search in the user journey is really important. It's like, how are we gonna, make this the most trustworthy part of search? And then the other big thing voice search and more diversity in search users. You know, if you ask someone who's been using search, or how we used to use search in the early days where you just type in like a really basic query versus how your kids might use search, that, you know, different types of users are using the tool differently. And they're, which means that it's like the long tail, the really long search queries, they keep getting longer. People only keep searching in new ways. So Google's trying to figure that out. So we'll get into our 5 big changes. All right, 5 big SEO changes. Number 1, the rise of the knowledge graph. Semantic entities are going to be big parts of our lives as content strategists. And if you've never heard of a knowledge graph before, then this is your lucky day. Knowledge graphs are, I think of them, this is an example of one in the slide, but I think of knowledge graphs as just giant 3D word clouds that relate to a specific topic and take related topics and compare them to each other. So we're really going from an individual search query where to a larger entity that encompasses a wider variety of topics in the language. Search engines really are operating more on topic graphs. So this is the example I always give because I actually worked on a company called cakes.com. It used to be where if you wanted to optimize for cake, you would say the word cake over and over and over again in the search in the page content, and then it would show up for cake. And you would just use all for, cake, cakes, cupcake. Now with a topic graph, you're really looking for words that are related to cake, but not actually the same. So things like subtopics like icing, party, chocolate, and similarly within, and here's me trying to do sports, soccer, football, different subtopics with player and club names, scores and statistics. These are all part of the larger entity of the topic of soccer or football. It's not like you're saying soccer over and over and over again, or even just writing about, the rules of soccer. If you have a website that is devoted to soccer, then you probably want to have some scores and statistics, or you want to have like these different types of content, different content variety that speaks to the topic rather than just, writing ad nauseum about the single word. And so when it applies to a brand, then you're thinking your entity is your location and hours, product reviews, brand values, a lot of everything. It's not just a word. It's not just people are just looking for your brand name. They're looking for kind of the larger idea of your brand, like the knowledge, all the little topics that your brand or your website covers. And how they relate to each other. So if you sell cake and all of a sudden start talking about football, you're not going to, even if you rank really well for cake, you're not going to rank really well for football unless you kind of build up that topic. So there is a lot of related topics. So similar to that, your website is your brand entity as far as Google is concerned. And I think as far as users are concerned, brands are moving from the drive social traffic back to the website, which has never really worked because social platforms want you to stay on the social platform and optimize for that. Brands are moving from drive traffic to the website to, okay, well, like, our Facebook presence is this thing, our Facebook and Instagram presence is there, and it's kind of self-contained there. Our website really is, it is the facts about our brand. These are the things that we want everyone to know about our brand. And I use Stripe as my example because Stripe has immensely robust documentation, as well as, and it is an immense entity of lots of information about how to use Stripe, how to implement Stripe, no matter which audience you're talking to, if you are Stripe. So what this means for you and your brand, company, website is you want to focus on what goes into your knowledge graph. What are the things that people are asking for about your business? And what are the topics that your business wants to be an expert on? What are the facts about your business? And then what are the facts that you want people to know about your products, your services, what are all of the topics that you need to cover that are part of this, and then what's not? So, I mean, content strategist, that's what we've been doing for a while, right? Our website talks about this, not that. And it's just more of that, but really connecting those topics together. So with that, optimizing for topics is where we're going. This is a screenshot from some keyword research I did about how people search around bias and algorithmic bias. But this is just when I do keyword research now, I look up, I do look at keywords and make sure to aggregate every keyword that has the word the word. So for Facebook, any keyword that had the word both Facebook and algorithm in it, I listed in this topic Facebook algorithm, and this is the total number of monthly searches that are concerning the Facebook algorithm. And then if you were to go into my pivot table and you would see those individual keywords, but it's really looking at, okay, this is how people search around this topic, Facebook algorithm. What are all the questions they ask? How are all the ways they talk about it? How are all the different, especially within keyword research, what are all the different queries that they could be asking? Because even if one person is asking it, that could be an indication, or if someone else could be asking an extremely similar question in a different way. So you're really trying to optimize for topics in not necessarily in the way that the algorithm is presenting your people also ask with these really strange, rigid questions. You're optimizing for a full topic. You're writing about, you're creating content that will address many people's questions in different ways that they're asking. Whether they're asking through voice, or they're asking, they're just typing on their phone, or they're asking a more in-depth query. So it has a lot to do with building topic authority versus building page authority. Topic-focused optimization really relies on keyword research to determine audience needs. Definitely favors comprehensive pages and web experiences. I'm doing a lot of convincing clients. It's like, let's build out a really good 1,500 word page that answers a lot of different questions and has some navigation on that page, but is about a topic. And that's kind of why I also am a fan of working with editors and people who are more, who are used to building, more of a topic experience versus just kind of like, and then we write for this keyword, and then we write for this keyword. It's similar to if you've been using content pillars the past few years. It's very like topic optimization isn't new, but it's very similar to content pillars. Although I would say that with content pillars, or the difference between topic focused optimization and content pillars is more that pillars can be a little more vague, big ideas, versus like topic optimization is going to be a noun or something that is an actual, concrete topic. Audience intent, always important for topic focused optimization. When you read a query, make sure you know what the audience wants to find with that query. And if you don't know, Google it and see what comes up first. And that's probably what the audience wants to find, because Google's done all their research and not done all their research. They've got that really awesome algorithm that surfaces the most relevant results in general. So understanding audience intent, super super important for selecting your topics, your core phrases. There is more chance of search visibility if your topic experiences are clearly connected and mapped early. I can't emphasize this enough. I wrote a blog post, or I wrote a newsletter about a year ago about why I hate how all websites just have blog now, because they all are doing what HubSpot did, right? Where it's just like, and then we don't know what to write about, so we put it in the blog, and it's just a pile of content of various topics, and they're like, well, it has categories and tags attached, but it's not in the actual information architecture of your site. People don't go to your blog, your company blog, to read your company blog. Like, no one's going to your blog page. If you want to have regularly published information about a topic on your site, that should be woven into the website architecture, instead of just like, oh, and then we're writing SEO content on the blog. That's kind of one of the biggest changes that I see and has worked for my clients, as far as, okay, let's actually restructure this so the topics you want to cover are part of your information architecture rather than an afterthought. And then, yeah, well-written, comprehensive pages, good experiences, because they'll rank for a number of long tail terms. A good page, when you go through the keywords in Search Console that come up for a good page, there's such a wide variety in how people find in the long tail, like 10-word search terms that people find your content on. For a really good page, it's kind of fascinating. So yeah, topic. And then as far as choosing quality topics and keywords, reviewing that aggregate search volume, topic search volume when possible to determine priority. Really, the Google autocomplete Q&A data. Answer the Public is a good tool for ideas, but autocomplete search, once again, autocomplete is informed by predictive text, which is not how Google, which is not the same algorithm that Google is using to process searches. So it's not, autocomplete isn't actually reflective of how people actually search. It's how, it's what the next word that Google thinks that you're going to say based on how other people have previously used that single word before. So also in choosing quality topics and keywords, aligning with how users search, align those with brand goals rather than just kind of one-off random ideas that you had, like, oh, we're gonna rank for kittens today. It's really, you really want to think about your search as part of your brand architecture. And then also you want to run topic comparisons with competitors. How can you cover a topic better than your competitors? And what questions can you ask? And what words do you need to use that are similar to the words that they're using? Number 3, big change, structured data. Schema markup has been around for a long, long time. And it's been something that technical SEO folk have been pushing on for a while, and then content folk like me are like, is that, I don't know, it seems really complicated, because it is. But schema markup and structured data is so important, because what's happening is Google's language processing algorithms are getting better at understanding vague queries, but they're working on processing all the vague search query language and this just kind of this big pile of text. And structured data is important for Google to actually see, these are the facts that this company wants to highlight, that you know, these are the brand's hours and location. This is their phone number. This is an article, or this is a blog post. Structured data and schema markup helps so much with search visibility. And there's so many different kinds of schema markup that you can use, but there are, there's a few that you'll really want to go back to, especially organizational, publishing, topic and description, and some of those kind of really, commonly used schemas. Recipes have a lot of schema. Anything where your data or the on-page data is, aligns with a certain type of structure. If there is a schema markup to describe that data on the back end, then you want to add that to your site. So this is how I kind of explain natural language processing to people who aren't, complete SEO wonks like I am. It's process natural language. Like, natural language processing is about as natural as this photo, this stock photo of like fake diversity, just like, everyone's just happy and just smiling and all just buddy. It's very processed. Search engines need, while they're processing all that natural language, they need a source of truth. So Google My Business for local businesses and schema structured data are awesome. Google also confirms a lot of data with Wikipedia and Wikidata. So if you can, use some of that data, basically planning for schema markup in your site's information architecture, whatever you can automate with your content management system, work with your development team. Schema markup will help your sites perform better in search. So I'm sure there's a lot of questions about that because schema markup is kind of complicated. Number 4, accessibility. So alt text has been a thing for a while. We used to optimize every image on the website with the keywords that we wanted the website to rank for. That's not what alt text is for. Alt text is, thank goodness, is getting its day as far, and web accessibility. Like, I'm so glad that people are talking about this regularly now, because there's so many different elements that we can use to help make the web accessible for all. And speed, alt text, they're only part of it. So when Google thinks about accessibility, and when we think about accessibility, it's not just making the web accessible for folks with disabilities. It also means that if you're, it's optimizing for, if you're on a phone in an area where there's not much internet, can you still see the web page? Can you still understand the web page? It's very much, accessibility is not just accessible for all people, but accessible for all devices and in all environments. So site speed is super important, but the core web vitals, again, if you've been following SEO at all this year, these 3 big metrics that Google is looking at: largest contentful paint, which is how fast the content actually loads on your site and when most of the content shows up and how long that takes. First input delay, which is if you touch or interact with, if you interact with the site, how long does the site take to respond to your interaction? And then cumulative layout shift, which is if you are reading a piece of content and you're in the middle of reading it, and then all of a sudden an ad loads and your content goes to the bottom of the page and you've lost your place. That's cumulative layout shift. It's how much do the elements of the page shift around as they're loading, and do page elements shift around kind of after your page has already loaded, because that is a poor user experience. That's a pet peeve of mine. If I'm reading an article on Wired, and a giant Cartier ad loads and I lose my place in the article, I get mad at the cumulative layout shift. So paying attention to those core web vitals and optimizing for those is really important. Google's the algorithm's been updating basically all summer to include these more, and they're going to be even bigger factors as we move forward. So in planning for accessibility, make sure all your buttons and content-rich images have descriptive, useful alt text. Keep your core web vitals in mind, always, always. Limiting unnecessary or cosmetic JavaScript for, and I say for business websites, for websites that you want to be primarily used to find information rather than like art. Limiting that unnecessary JavaScript, because Google has a harder time processing that. It can definitely slow down sites. And then ensuring that your address, your contact information, it's easy to find in a couple of places, especially the footer. Just as far as accessibility goes, put your address and phone number in your footer, please. That is from that's from a content strategist who sees way too much. I'm like, well, you have this beautiful new website. It looks really, really pretty, but I don't know where you're located. So, planning for, that's just general content access and making sure that everyone can find your phone number and contact information. And on your website itself, and not in the little the little chat bubble that comes up. And then finally, trust signals. This is huge, especially after this year and last year. Trust signals are becoming ever more important to showing up in Google. Google talked a lot about expertise, authority, and trust in the past few years, but they're actually starting to use more trust signals in the ranking algorithm itself. So there's this about this result that just started that on the right here, where it says, okay, here is the source, and this is the Lancet is a good source because it's peer reviewed, and we know that it's a good source. It's a secure website. It's a good medical journal. Wikipedia says so. And we can talk about then Wikipedia becomes the source of truth. There's all kinds of we can talk a lot about where the knowledge comes from, but also the other big thing is if the results are quickly changing, like if people are, I like this example of UFO film traveling 106 miles per hour. Those results are quickly changing. Google's going to say, hey, this isn't, we don't know a lot about this topic yet. So maybe you want to wait until information becomes more reliable from a more reliable source rather than trying to find on search, because search results take a while to really establish. It takes about 2 to 4 weeks to establish a new search pattern or knowledge graph within Google. So something that just is happening now, Google's not the best place to go, and it wants you to know that. Truth matters. One of the things that I am advising all of my clients to do right now is to put editorial if they're building a content-driven website, have authors and datelines. They're important. Again, I know their authorship has been on and off important in Google, but it is pretty important if you're trying to look like a source of information that people want to trust. So you have an author who is named and added in your schema markup. Also, adding a dateline. It became very popular in the past 10 years to just make evergreen content with no datelines. That's not really, I've advised people in all different levels on that. But adding a dateline is important. Google wants to see that if you have facts on your page, that it's been updated recently and that those facts are recent, because now, now the index is better than ever, bigger than ever, and there's more content being added every day. I don't actually want results from 2013 for pretty much anything. I want results from 2020, 2021 for almost all of my queries. I want to know what's most recent, what's updated. And so those datelines are really important. Disclosing affiliate links, especially if they're in line, that's extremely important. Disclosing when you have advertising on your site, always important. links to and from your site remain a sign of trust. Always, if you were trying to build authority, using kind of traditional PR to get people to link to your site because they think you're an authority is a good idea. Links are a sign of trust. And so as if you own a website, then use your website to link to others that you trust. And links on page are extremely important. Detailed footnotes where necessary, depending on the type of content that you're producing. So proving that you either have the authority or you've done your homework is extremely important. Schema markup has added editorial and content policies, like a slew of different kinds of policies that you can now mark up. That I recommend at least one editorial policy if you are regularly publishing content by multiple authors, at least one kind of content policy that says, okay, this is the kind of content we publish. These are the, you can these are our ethics. This is how we do research. You don't need to have, this is an editorial policy from a journal, a scientific journal. So it doesn't need to be as robust if you're not a scientific journal, but you should have some kind of editorial policy that says, hey, someone is looking out for the quality of this information. And then content that supports brand trust, product documentation, help sections, regular updates also supports SEO. If you are, your website looks active and is helping people and people seem to come to your site as a resource, that helps. It helps to, helps to tell the truth and to mark that truth up with schema and structured data. So that's kind of a lot. There's a lot of changes there. A lot of probably maybe some new concepts for some folks. If you learned SEO in 2012, a lot has changed. So it's definitely a much broader, consideration of your brand, of your knowledge graph, of the trust signals that you want to build, and the topics that you want to grow for your brand. But it's really kind of thinking of that holistic knowledge graph versus just like, I want to rank for, I don't know if you've ever seen the old SEO video, I want to rank #1 for credit cards. Like that's, that's kind of a classic video. So yeah, questions. I'd love to.
We have a bunch of them queued up, Deborah. Hey. I'll try to be quick here. So first, going way back to the start of this section, okay. Anu asked, they're a noob, and they asked, what do you mean by the long tail? So could you define long tail?
Oh yeah, long tail is basically any search term that's over 4 words. And that has, so your regular head search term would be shoes, and a long tail search would be, how do I find shoes in my area? So that's kind of the basic quick overview of long tail.
Cool, thanks. And then John Hickey had a question. If Google is indexing content behind paywalls, does that mean they're indexing content behind registration gates like app notes or webinars behind registration gates? How deep are they going?
So content behind paywalls has to be marked up properly. As a news organization, like there's a schema markup for this is behind a paywall versus not. Generally, login and registration, probably not index unless you've marked it up that way. And usually you don't really want to index that content. So it's not something Google's automatically doing. It's something that you have to tell the search engine to do.
Right, and then mark it up correctly.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and then go through the markup correctly, which is, a task.
And then John had another question too about, he said, interesting about weaving content into the IA. Do you suggest placing evergreen content somewhere other than the blog so that it doesn't get a date stamp? And John, if you want to elaborate on that, feel free to unmute yourself. Any thoughts on that, Deborah?
Yeah, so yeah, Yeah, it's more about, having blogs can be, really good ways to have company updates, really quick little updates. But if you're talking about, growing your website as a brand, like a website as part of your brand, it's really, you want to build kind of deep resources sections on topics that can be woven into your information architecture, I guess is kind of what I'm getting at there. It's definitely less than like, let's just have a page about this specific topic, and more like, hey, let's build our expertise around with a number of pages related to the same topic.
Cool. And then
So Deborah, for some sorry.
Go ahead.
So for some clarification around that, if you put content in a blog and it gets date stamped, and you're talking about the importance of date stamping, or what'd you call it? Dateline. If you put that content in there and you don't have the resource to update that content each year, then eventually you're going to show in the SERP results in 2025 with the 2021 article, and a few people are going to click that. So if you don't have the resource to update content, do you recommend it go somewhere other than the blog so it doesn't get date stamped?
If I would say that keeping content on your website that you can regularly update would be a priority. So if you can't regularly update it, maybe it shouldn't, maybe it's not a priority for keeping on your website. That's kind of how I'd answer that question. It can stay on your website for as long as you want it to, but you just will stop, it'll deprecate in search quality after a while. So it'll stop bringing leads or traffic or whatever you're looking for.
And then Erin had a question about when you were talking about like the autocomplete and how inadequate that was and how it doesn't really match up with how the search algorithm works. She asks, what are better, more low-level tools content strategists can or should use for keyword research, as opposed to answer the public and things like that?
Yeah, I know it's hard because Keyword Planner doesn't really work for free anymore. It doesn't really work for anybody anymore. Keyword Planner was what we used to use. It's part of AdWords. I use a third-party tool to do keyword research. The tool I use is called Mangools. It's pretty inexpensive compared to other tools. It's pretty new on the market, but usually if you're doing bigger keyword research, you're going to want to invest in a tool, or Keywords Everywhere can help because it'll show you. Keywords Everywhere is a plugin that can show you search volumes based on what people are searching for. But if you want to do in-depth keyword research, investing in a tool like Moz. My two favorites are Moz and Mangools for content strategists. Ahrefs and SEMrush are great too, as they can be a little more technical. And so if you're a word person, Moz is great. So yeah, all of those are great tools. It's just, they do require some form of payment.
Cool, thanks. Hey, and it wasn't really a question, but I want to ask about Rich commented FAQ schema for the win.
Yes.
And I think, but there's all this research in the content design world that shows that FAQs are bad for user experience. So how do you reconcile that? Like the SEO, I know that because the FAQ markup is in Schema, SEOs are going to love it, but if it doesn't help the user, how is that being sorted out?
Yeah, only put questions that are actually frequently asked in your frequently asked questions. That is my guide of that. That's my, I just did one for a client, and their website had been very badly optimized before. And there's just some random questions about chiropractic treatment in there. And it was just wait, do your people actually ask this? Have you ever heard a customer ask this? If not, get it out of there. But FAQ schema, if it is an actual, if it is an actual question, FAQ schema is really great.
Cool, thanks.
Yeah.
And then kind of following on to that, Alana had a question. How to best implement schema.org markup using a CMS?
Depends on your CMS. there is a really great tool. I think it's just called Schema app. That's an enterprise level tool. It can be a little more expensive. You can just hard code schema into some pages, especially location schema. If you actually go to technicalseo.com, there's a bunch of tools from the agency Merkle that there is a schema generator on there. And I use that for almost all the schema that I build for clients. And then I just hard code it on the site. There's WordPress plugins for schema. There's, I'm sure there's stuff for Drupal and for other open source systems. It's probably something that you're going to want to work on with your developer. And if you need to do thousands of pages at template level, Schema app is awesome. It's just, again, it's enterprise level. So it kind of depends on what your needs are.
Got it. Thanks. And then Aaron had a question also related to Schema. What's a helpful way to communicate Schema governance to clients in a post-launch world? Like, how do you keep them on track?
Oh my gosh. That is an interesting question. Once it's there, you want to make sure that it doesn't break. And so Google has a tester, and actually Search Console will tell. I got a thing from a client last night that Search Console tells you when it breaks. And I should send them a message like, hey, did you touch this? Because it's broken now. So yeah, Schema is the best way as far as governance goes, like kind of like a lot of technical SEO stuff. It's like you want to check to make sure it's not broken, and only add it if you know that it's not going to break as a whole. But like just kind of try to do it at once. I try to do it all at once, and then just make sure it doesn't break. Yeah.
Got it. Then Anu had another question about links as a sign of trust. Does the diversity of links matter, or can it be 2 or 3 sites round robin linking to each other to up their SEO results?
You really want quality links from trusted sources, from press, from other well-known websites. Check the domain authority, make sure that they also have domain authority. And if you're just linking to each other in a chain, like, no, like you might get some little boost from each other, but unless Google's pretty smart about figuring out like what are link farms and what are not. So you really want to go for that authentic PR, those authentic links. Guest post building isn't really going to help all that much anymore. People who post guest posts are, that's kind of a tactic that is thankfully kind of going away. Because it doesn't produce good content.
Agreed. Yeah. Hey, and I'm not sure how to pronounce it. Vashale. Apologies if I mispronounced your name, but asks, our content systems are shifting to Salesforce. Would you be able to share any suggestions or things to keep in mind with that shift?
I've only worked with, I haven't done a lot with Salesforce in the last couple of years. So I only really worked with Pardot, which was a landing page builder. So I don't know. I honestly don't have a lot of experience with Salesforce and SEO. I don't know what their web builder is like or their CMS is like. I don't know if they must have, I don't know if anyone knows if they bought one. So I'm sorry. I don't have a lot of experience with Salesforce websites directly.
Got it, yeah. And then Suzanne had a question about to what extent does Google ding you for plagiarism or redundant copy?
Plagiarism is don't do that. You're not going to rank with that. Redundant copy, duplicate content is sometimes necessary. Like, let's say that you have to describe similar things and 2 similar things in different places, and that there's only so many words you can use to describe them. That's fine, but you really want to try to make as few good pages as possible. So you really want to focus on making good pages that are unique and address a topic, and try not to have like redundant copy in different places. And I know that especially when you get a really large like e-commerce website and you have a lot of category pages, sometimes you need to do redundant copy, and Google's okay with that, but you do want to have original content as well on each page.
Got it. Cool. And then Jen had a question. She says, an old SEO policy I've seen is to use a blog to drive traffic to a separate site, since it can be hard to optimize a site with little content that isn't regularly updated. Is that strategy now outdated?
I'm not entirely sure the types of sites you're referring to.
Jen, if you're on and want to unmute.
Yeah.
I am. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hi. Yeah.
Hi. It's for an e-commerce site.
Mhm.
So they were having trouble optimizing the store. So they instead went and optimized the blog and have the traffic going from the blog into the store. But now we're finding that with the new Google policies, it's easier to optimize the store than it is the blog. And that's why I was just wondering whether the whole process that they built their site on is outdated.
Yeah, that's more of what I would say the HubSpot model. That is going out of date. Google really wants to see that with e-commerce. I don't do a lot of e-commerce either. I do, but with e-commerce, it's challenging because you want people to buy the products and stay in the store, but you also want to give them good content. But having kind of a separate site or a blog subdomain and then directing to the store, that is likely that is falling out of favor, is going out of date. But that said, plenty of companies still have very successful content marketing portions on their website. I think it's just kind of it is kind of a content design quandary. How do we do this if the blog is deprecated? I do recommend that everything be on the same domain, and that will help all SEO rather than having a blog on a different domain and the store on one domain. Having it all together is a good idea, even though from a content management system perspective, that can also be quite tricky. So I feel your pain there. So yeah, that's kind of, it is becoming more out of date.
Thank you. I do want to add, because I'm managing the blog and I don't want to hear that, of course.
I'm sorry.
We are trying to repurpose it as making the blog an actual product, making the information a product.
Yes. Yes.
Is that a way to save it, you think?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And that you can do very successfully, for sure.
Nice. Thanks, Jen. Hey, and David has a question. I love this question. If you were starting a new website or brand, what are the top 3 things you'd do right at the start?
Ooh. So I actually recently wrote a newsletter about this, which is basically just brand SEO, have your schema markup, do your Google My Business, and also spend some time on your information architecture. Think about, okay, where do we need to be right now? And then how do we want to grow this in a sustainable way? And how can we do that through our navigation? But if I were just starting, also, I do work with a lot of startups, and sometimes it's we just need to get something up and running. Make sure that you show up in search for your brand name. That's the most important thing. When people search for your brand name, they should be able to find you, and you can do that with Schema, with a good footer, and with Google My Business.
Well, thanks. Hey, and then Rich, I just want to acknowledge that Rich commented, caveat, I'm not a fan of FAQs. I hope I didn't come across as accusatory. I just want to acknowledge it. I don't think any of us are fans of it. Anyhow.
As a content strategist, right, they're abhorrent and they're oxymoronic because they're not frequently asked by anyone. They're frequently answered by some marketer, but we are having success with them on Autodesk.com, on the product centers. What's nice is by default they're collapsed, so they're not too awful to the humans, and Google loves them. Is really, I think we're all just indentured servants to SEO for Google, right? Google says jump, we say how high.
Exactly.
Anyway, I really appreciate the presentation.
Oh, thanks.
Thanks. And Deborah, so Aaron had another, or I'm sorry, no, Anu had another question. How much of SEO's breaking is attributable to devs rather than someone messing with markup by mistake? I guess how much of it's attributable to markup problems or issues?
Okay, so the thing about SEO is you're never going to get dinged for bad markup. You're just not going to see that, like, good markup will lift your site. Bad markup will just, Google won't see it as well, because markup is basically just saying, look here for the good stuff. Markup just makes it so it's easier to see in your pile of content that is being natural language processed. So you don't, and also Google penalties are like, it's never really about Google's punishing you. It's always how can it see me better? How can the algorithm see and how can it be more visible? So yeah.
Got it. Thanks. Hey, and I had a question too. You've mentioned several times your knowledge graph. Now, when you say that, are you talking about the schema.org and other semantic markup in your site, or are you suggesting that companies should actually build their own knowledge graph?
Well, okay, so brands do have a knowledge graph in Google that it's what comes up if you search for a brand name, and you see on the right-hand side on a desktop, there's like a big square and it has all the details about your brand. That's your knowledge graph, technically, within Google. But then anything, when I think about it, it's more like, then there's the rest of the brand values and topic architecture that you can build around it. That's also part of your knowledge graph. So yeah, it doesn't need to be necessarily as a formal semantic knowledge graph, but like kind of the closer you can think about it that way, you probably will be more successful.
Hey, and sorry, Paula wanted to revisit and come back around to, like, if you're building the new site or brand, what are the top 3 things you do? Like in just sort of a quick bullet point list, like the little action items we can leave for folks, because we need to wrap up.
Yeah. Okay. So in addition to my business and Schema, also just do a little bit of research on how people search for your product and make sure you use those words in your website. That's number 2. And a little bit of research means ask your customers how they would search for your product, and they'll probably tell you. But if not, you can do a little keyword research too, and just competitor research and see how they describe it. But if you're making, the example that we used to use is we had a client, they're selling foaming bath gel, and it's bubble bath. People search for bubble bath. Foaming bath gel sounds wonderful, but bubble bath is what people are actually looking for. And then for things that you're just starting business, just spend time on your content, and spend time on making your content good, and don't try to grow that too fast. Like, you focus on your user experience and not having a broken website, and your brand and content will grow within Google.
Excellent, thanks.
Yeah.
Hey, and Jen circled back. You had mentioned the new content policy markup in schema.org. It sounds like Jen went online looking for that and couldn't find anything. Can you talk, and I can read your question, and Jen, if you want to come in, but she says, does anyone have any more info on creating a content policy in Schema? Does that simply mean creating a page that explains the content policy and doing Schema on that? Anyhow, she couldn't find any info on it.
So if you send me an email, my email address is right there. I will send you the page, and I can probably send it to. I'll have to Google it and find it, but there is one, and it lists all the different policies on schema.org. That it's like corrections policy, diversity policy, editorial policy. They have a lot of different policies. And if you email me, I'll totally send that to you. That should be there. But
we can drop that in the Slack too. So thanks, Deborah. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah.
Paula, I'll turn it over to you. I think it sounds like it's about time to wrap up, so I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah. Well, obviously, incredible topic, great discussion, great questions.
Yeah,
I'd like to thank Deborah. She is in Minneapolis, so it's 9:30 p.m. there. I happen to know she's in an unair conditioned basement, so she is doing an incredible job of holding it, holding it together there. But I really appreciate her joining us tonight, sharing so much great information. As we've mentioned, she's got her slide up still here. Please do check out her newsletter. I couldn't recommend it enough. And join us on our Slack channel. We do a lot of kind of just sharing resources and stuff there. So I will probably impose on Deborah to give us some things we can share there, some links and tools, recommendations, and so on. Thank you all for joining, and have a great evening.
Thanks, everyone.
So I can stick around for a few minutes. I think Paula can too, if you had any debriefing you want to do with Deborah. But if you just want to get out of that fussy, stuffy basement.
I'm just getting very warm. That was great. Thank you. This is the first time I've really done this talk. So thanks. And yeah, if you have any feedback or anything.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, I'm happy to share. I do have a list of links that can go with this talk, and yeah, I'll share those with you, and I'll send my slides over as well.
Yes, that's great. Thank you.
Cool.
Deborah, just kind of related to that, how do you stay on top of stuff in SEO? Because it's a mess. And just like finding that new schema.org page about content policy, that kind of stuff. Do you have a place you like, or?
I do watch the blogs a little bit. I mostly rely on Google's, the one thing with SEO is that people kind of freak out every time there's an algorithm update, and there's algorithm updates all the time. So if you do that, you're always freaking out. So it's more that I follow a few newsletters, and I actually can't. I look at Search Engine Journal and Search Engine Land pretty regularly, but there's never a lot of breaking news except for when Google is making its bigger updates. And they're doing way more transparent than they ever were before. As this is what we're updating. This is why we're updating it. The Google developers blog is great. They used to have nothing, and now they're very transparent. And also the John Mueller, they do search office hours. I don't do those all the time, but I'll tune in and just say, okay, this seems to be what's going on. This schema stuff that's mostly because I've been building that a lot for my clients. So I've been paying really close attention to what I can build, and then when to use those different things. And because one of the things that I found is happening is because people got so used to not using RSS readers, they don't have any structured markup on the back of their sites sometimes, besides an H1 and H2 tag. So it's we are basically building schema from scratch. So yeah.
I like Marie Haynes for algorithm updates. Is there anybody else you follow for that, or is she?
Let's see. SEO people I follow. I've been following Lily Ray, and I forget the company that she is with. But I typically, and there's a few people, there's a few people who write occasionally, like Jess Peck. She wrote a really great thing on cumulative layout shift. I used to follow Moz, you see what Moz has been updating, but it's not as, I am less attached to specific names as just kind of figuring out what's just generally going on in the conversation, and picking out what kind of seems, what seems important, and then what my clients need. There's a lot of that too. A lot of times clients ask me for really specific things, and then I just wind up I got a request this year to optimize for Google News, and I hadn't gotten one of those in a long time, and I had to do all new research on the thing that I learned 5 years ago and had to redo. So it's usually like that. It's client has a question, and then we delve deep into the topic. So.
This is David. I've been hanging on here.
Okay, yeah. Thanks.
So interested. Blew me away about talking about moving the blog out of the blog, because we put everything in the blog. So I do have one quick question, 30 seconds. You were talking about support documentation and how that's gaining in popularity. That's almost always off domain,
Yes.
subdomained.
I know.
And sometimes it's even, behind a login.
Yep.
Would you recommend companies put the support content on their primary domain without subdomaining it?
Mm-hmm. I look at Stripe because I think they have the best website of all the websites, which actually their documentation is so extensive that sometimes I can't find what I need. In which case, maybe you might want to put it on the back end. But if you look and people are searching for your documentation in finding like in Google search and they're asking questions in Google search, then like if you just are looking at that with your branded terms and like even just looking in Search Console and seeing what people are asking about your brand name, then you can, then that is a case for putting support documentation and making it a part of your website, either as a subdomain or as a main part of your website. That's a big information architecture question, but it helps a lot. And that's what,
also, yeah. It's also increasingly a marketing question. Like I was just talking to Jack Molisani about this today and Scott Abel and others in that world. It's like, that's as important as your marketing material now, because when people are making buying decisions, first thing they want to look at is the support document.
Hire on service. Yeah.
Well, that's all I've been living in lately is we've been launching this customer content platform product. So helping organizations manage their customer content. But I hadn't thought about the benefit of putting it on a primary domain.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll definitely look into that. Does it create more of like a knowledge graph and more authority for the website?
Well, yeah, because your website is for people to know facts about your company. So your support documentation is your facts. So it kind of, you use the words that you're about naturally in that writing, and you're not trying to force them into some marketing copy. That helps overall.
Wow. Okay. That's really helpful. All right. I appreciate your time. Thanks.
Yeah.
Deborah, has it been settled, like whether to use subdirectories or subdomains? I thought it seemed settled on directories.
I mean, subdirectories are generally better. But people use subdomains because they're easier to build. It's easier to build a whole new website and just, have them.
You just grab Help Scout.
You can do it in a subdirectory too, but that requires a little more coding, and people don't really like it. Yeah. But
yeah, got it. Cool. Hey, we should let you go. I know. Sorry for the extra Q&A, but
oh yeah, no worries. This was really fun. Thank you very much for inviting me. And one day when I go to Seattle, we'll all get lunch.
I'd love that.
Awesome.
Thanks so much, Deborah.